Well, welcome folks to the first 2022 Fridays for Future. Here we are in another year, still in a climate crisis, a pandemic crisis, a democracy crisis. I'm not sure how many existential threats we can handle at one time, but they are all connected. And I think the things that we're going to talk about today will really help us find some ways that we can take some action and move forward. And regenerative agriculture is just one of the best ways for us to think about getting involved. So just a couple announcements, and then and you all are free to make announcements as well. And then I've got just a little short, maybe 5-minute update on our county campaign, and then we'll turn the floor over to our guest speaker today, Kirsten Clemente, the DeLano Farm's director for the Kalamazoo Nature Center. Right now, I'm in a meeting, but I'll talk to you later. And if everybody could mute, that's great until we speak. So just a couple quick announcements. Let's see, we're gonna check my list here. I need these silly things now. Tuesday, January 18th, we just read Liz Jensen's novella, Our Silver City 2094. Fantastic book club discussion about that. Last Tuesday, she couldn't join us at 5:30 at night because she's in the UK, which would be like 11 p.m. for her. So she's going to join us Tuesday at noon for a conversation about the role of climate and ecological fiction. You should know that she has written about 8 books. Most of them are like eco thrillers, The Rapture, Oryx, and Crank. She wrote a whole trilogy. She's just a fantastic writer. She also is one of the most articulate intellectuals about why we need stories and the power of narrative in addressing the climate crisis. And she's also an incredible activist. She is one of the founding members of Extinction Rebellion's Writers Rebel. So she's going to come talk to us Tuesday at noon. I'll record that. So if you can't join us virtually live, don't worry, we are going to record that conversation. I'm really excited to be hosting her. She's quite the famous author. And so much thanks to one of our former Fulbright scholars, Dr. Helen Mundler from Paris, that joined us a couple years ago here on campus. So please join us Tuesday. Our next Fridays for Future, right? We're back on our regular schedule here in 2022 for the 2nd and 4th Fridays. So January 28th, we will meet here again, and we'll be hearing from Chris Dilley and really more about how People's Food Co-op works, but how they became one of the leading anti-racist institutions in our local community will be the focus of that talk. So we're looking forward to that. The next book club will be February 8th, and we'll be reading Climate Ghosts. And the author, Nancy Langston, who's a professor at Michigan Tech and a really award-winning, well-renowned environmental historian, will be here for that. Valerie, I can put that stuff in the chat, and hopefully y'all know to get fun emails from me, right? Yeah. So all that'll be coming out in emails this next week too. What else? Other quick announcements from folks around the horn here? Other things that we should be watching out for and knowing that are going on? Anyone want the floor for just a moment for any announcements? I'm scanning. Oh God, I love it when there's 2 screens of you.
Denise, I'll go. And you know, Sandy Borden, who is a professor in the School of Communication and director of the Center for the Study of Ethics in Society, will have a couple of events that people in this group may be interested in. Hopefully, we're going to be bringing a well-known writer to come and give the Winnie Veenstra Peace Lecture later in the semester, and I'm sure you'll provide more information about that later on. And hopefully we'll be reading, it's Amitav Ghosh and his book, The Nutmeg Curse. Hopefully that's going to be a book club selection for us. The Ethics Center also has a book club, and they're featuring 3 books this semester. They do their book club a little bit differently. They have multiple sessions. People can sign up and get free books. And one of the books that will be discussed is my book, Carbon Criminals, Climate Crime. So if anyone's interested in signing up for that, I think it'll be late March, early April, those sessions. And if you're interested, you can check on the website, the WMU website for the Center for the Study of Ethics in Society and their book club. And I'm sure Denise will also be sending out some emails about that as well.
I absolutely will. Yeah, we haven't pulled the final trigger on our hopefully amazing end of year semester for us book club speaker. I think Kalamazoo Nature Center, there's some other stuff going on. Do you want to do some announcements now, Jenny?
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks, Denise. As part of Kirsten being here today, I wanted to talk a little bit more about what's going on at the Nature Center. Is it difficult, complicated for me to share my screen real quick, or I can do either? I can share my screen, or I can.
You should be able to.
Okay.
Do it. Take the power.
All right, here we go. So Kalamazoo Nature Center has renovated its exhibit hall, which change that's been coming for, I don't know, 20 plus years maybe. And it's a beautiful space in there. We've got an exhibit. Our first exhibit up is called Art Drawn from Nature. And it's up right now. You can go see it if you want to. It's going to be up a little longer than the dates that you see on here because we closed down for staff shortages due to COVID last week. So the dates will be extended. There's an opening on February 11th. This is, we have 8 artists that all are telling their stories of their relationship with nature through their art. It's a really beautiful space in there. So I encourage you to see it. Following that, there's going to be a community, an opportunity for you to come and learn about what we're doing and tell us what you think about it and what you think we should be doing in really creative and fun ways. So check that out in April. That's going to be here. Come join us for Maple Sugar Festival, y'all. March 5 and 6, we are going to be back into our regular Maple Sugar Fest. We are expanding the historic highlights of our Maple Sugar Festival. We're adding a few new crafters. We'll have a storyteller there, and then we'll have all of the regular stuff, including our an outdoor pancake and sausage breakfast. We didn't do that last year. We're bringing it back this year, but it'll be outside. So come join us. And then I wanted to just say some quick things because Kirsten is here with us. I want to highlight the CSA. So please go walk at DeLano. If you go and walk, you can see the farm. It's beautiful. It's always beautiful. Kirsten keeps it like functioning, high functioning, and like exquisite at the same time. If you would like to be part of the CSA, you will receive a box of vegetables. You go pick up a box of vegetables and hang out on the farm once a week, every week through the summer. Our CSA sales open on February 1st. If you've got kiddos, you can also come join the farm as part of our summer farm club in June or our young farmers camp. So come check us out. Those are my things.
Great. Thanks so much for those updates. Kalamazoo Nature Center, always a lot of fantastic things going on. All right, with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and give an update on the countywide collective action campaign that we started. That should only take a couple minutes, and then we will get to our featured speaker here. So I know we took a little bit of a winter break, and here we are back. Just to remind everyone where we left things off in December, the Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition will be leading a countywide collective action campaign. And essentially this is targeted towards our elected and government officials so that we can educate newly elected officials since our last sort of campaign for climate emergency declarations was 2019, 2020. So there's been an election, of course. There are some folks that don't know maybe that they've passed climate emergency declarations. We want to make sure we're holding those that have accountable to those declarations. We need even more declarations. We want more climate action plans everywhere in our county. And we are also, I'm almost done with thank you all for everyone who gave me edits for a job description for a countywide climate coordinator, AKA czar. And what we've been doing to organize that campaign is building a contact database. And Donna, if you would help me out, thank you so much. We've had about 70 people respond and give us their contact information already. If you haven't done that and you're willing to be part of this campaign, please do that so that we can organize all of you into groups based on your elected officials. We're going to be starting with the county level commissioners. And so really what I wanted to share today is a little bit of the outcomes of that contact form that we've already done and how then we might move forward with creating some messaging points and getting together to talk to our elected officials. So again, we're going to organize by those political districts. So please fill out the form with your full address so that we can figure out who represents you and where you are and see where we can make the most impact. And we're going to begin with the Kalamazoo County again to remind and educate about that climate emergency declaration in 2019 that really hasn't been acted on since. And there are good reasons for that, pandemics and budgets and shutdowns and you name it. But really our asks there for the messaging will be along the lines of a countywide climate action plan, and also, again, this countywide climate coordinator. Someone really needs to be integrating all of the variety of plans that are happening in our community and making those be the best bang for our buck, taking advantage of state and federal dollars, you name it. So again, our county commission, some of the rules are changing as we are now under orders to go back to being in-person meetings. And so stay tuned a little bit for that. But essentially, the Kalamazoo County Board meets on the first and third Tuesdays, and there'll be opportunities for us to coordinate public comment. But also, I think the plan is that we will, in our smaller groups, reach out to our elected officials with our own messaging and ask for one-on-one meetings. And right now, the results of our contact form, we have a pretty good distribution across all of our county commissioners based on the 68 folks who have responded so far to our county commission survey. There's actually quite a few of us in the Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition that responded that don't live in the county of Kalamazoo, but we've got really good representation from a lot of different areas of Kalamazoo County so that we can be targeting Chair Hall, Commissioners McCassick and Melger, Strebs, Hepler. We've got a little bit of everyone in there. And again, the idea is that you'll be put into smaller groups based on who your elected officials are, and we'll work with you to develop those messaging materials so you'll be able to reach out to your own elected officials. That constituency-based model really works well. So expect to be contacted soon. The other question that we ask you in that forum is, how would you like to be contacted? Most people prefer email. I think we'll just continue with email for the moment. A lot of folks, of course, then when we have action campaigns, we really need to be able to be on sort of text alert so that we can know to show up at certain times. And so that's how you can expect to be contacted if you did share your information with us. And then the next level from that, and some things are already happening, right, is within the county of Kalamazoo, you've heard me say this before, there are 24 different governmental units, and I hope that each one of you lives in one of them so that we too can be reaching out at that very, very even local scale. And so we've got a little bit of work to do in cleaning up the data. Folks entered their address, and most folks address is Kalamazoo, even though you actually live in Texas Township or Richland or Cooper. And so we've got a little work to do in cleaning that data to get to the smaller groups of each one of these jurisdictions. And there are some different asks, right, depending on the different communities that you live in. So for example, Kalamazoo Township and the city of Kalamazoo and Portage are all moving forward with climate action planning. So we want to make sure we're supporting those elected officials and folks that are doing that. Everywhere else doesn't have a climate emergency declaration, or to our knowledge isn't working specifically on climate. And so we really need to get into those communities. And again, expect to be contacted and organized into these smaller groups where we can help develop messaging and attend meetings together. The big news, thanks to Steve Bertman actually out there, we're on the working agenda for Oshtemo Township Board Tuesday, January 18th at 6 p.m. So sometimes things can happen very, very quickly. So we'll run a little meeting to get our act together and see if we can get the conversation started with Oshtemo this Tuesday. If you didn't get an email from me late last night and you live in Oshtemo, please let me know and we will move forward with that. All right, I got 1 minute until I'm supposed to turn over to Kirsten. Any quick feedback or questions about like how we might move forward with this county campaign? Are you excited? Are you ready to do something? Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, Susan.
Emphasizing that these government entities can save money by taking action on climate.
We are looking forward to Susan's help with messaging.
Save money.
All right, folks. Well, thanks for letting me give you that little update so y'all kind of can know what's coming. I'm really excited to be leading all of that. And Tom, thank you. He's already talking to Texas Township. We're going to get in every single jurisdiction. I've got Legal Women Voters Prime to come help us with that as well. So yay, I'm very excited to be running that. All right. So Kirsten is here. We need to talk about how we're going to feed ourselves. One of our biggest transitions is coming up. And I think Donna McClurkin, our communications chair, is ready to introduce Kirsten, and then the floor will be yours.
Hi there, everyone. Kirsten, it's my thrill to introduce her today. She is the farm director at DeLano. She leads the farm operations, including the CSA, Community Supported Agriculture Program at the Nature Center. Kirsten is from Ohio, and she was educated at Miami University. And she developed her skills, which I can say are formidable. I know that from firsthand experience as a grower through hands-on farm work and reading every book about small scale farming she could get her hands on. And anyone who, and I see a number of volunteers, farm volunteers on this call today, and you know she's a walking encyclopedia. I've learned so much from her, and I know we all have. At DeLano Farm, her goals are to foster the growth of a vibrant, healthy soil ecosystem that will in turn serve to nourish our local community and educate about the vital role that agriculture plays in the overall health of our planet and sequestering carbon, which I know she's going to talk about too. And just as an aside, I learned two really cool things about Kirsten when I interviewed her for an encore piece I guess it was about a year and a half ago, that she likes to whittle and she can build a catapult. So if anybody needs to have a catapult built, Kirsten's your gal. Anyway, do you want us to put questions in the chat and Denise and I can try to monitor those, or do you want to save them for the end? What works for you?
Oh, I'm going to go through so much stuff so quickly that I think that saving for the end is the best, but I think it's always good to have them in the chat so that they are not forgotten. So thank you all for attending. I want to point out that Donna actually was an intern at the farm a few years back, and is currently one of our best weeders, a weeding guru. So anyhow, I'm going to get right to it since I have a lot to cover. We're going to weave together a lot of threads, and I haven't done a Zoom meeting in a while, so wish me luck sharing my screen here. There we go. Okay, that looks like it worked. All right, as you all know, I'm Kirsten Clemente. I am the farm director out at the DeLano Farm, and today I'm going to talk about regenerative agriculture, how we do it, why it actually works. I'm going to give you some context on our farming operations and our education operations. And then we're going to end with a little bit of information about how I made the transition to regenerative agriculture on our small scale market vegetable garden. So let's begin. Let's see. There we go. All right. So the farm is not actually on the main campus of the Nature Center. It's right across the street, about a half a mile away on West E Avenue, but we are a part of the Kalamazoo Nature Center. Come out anytime. It's a great place to walk. It's a great place to go cross-country skiing or snowshoeing right now. And in the summer, you get to see the farm, and it's really, really beautiful. So the land that we're on was once territory of the Machabanashawish band of the Potawatomi tribe. Currently, I think they're mainly referred to as the Gun Lake tribe, but they held the land where the farm currently sits. In the 1830s, the DeLano family moved from Western New York into Southwestern Michigan and began acquiring land. They farmed what is now the DeLano Farm from about the 1830s to the 1960s. And in 1968, the Kalamazoo Nature Center acquired the land and have held it ever since. And we do a lot of interesting programming out there. This is my first ever soil test when I had just first started working at the Nature Center. You'll notice that at that point we had 5,000 square feet under under cultivation, not a very large garden. It was a 50 by 100 patch of herbs and vegetables and flowers. And I'm including this slide because if you look at some of the facts there, we're pretty low in phosphorus, we're pretty low in potassium, we're pretty low in all of the major nutrients and most of the micronutrients. In fact, the only thing that we have a real abundance of are things like calcium, magnesium, and iron. It makes the water out there taste delicious, I can tell you. But I'm including this information just because you don't have to have top-notch vegetable growing soil to practice regenerative agriculture. Anyone can do it. And in fact, the poorer your soil, the more gains that you will actually make. So as I mentioned before, we started in 2018. We've expanded by about 8 times. We have almost an acre under very intensive cultivation. We're human powered, we're human scale. We're certified by the Michigan Agricultural Environmental Assurance Program, which mainly just means that we are very closely monitoring what we put on our soil so that we don't cause any groundwater or soil contamination. And although we are not certified organic, we use no synthetic pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, or synthetic fertilizers. Here's some of the stuff that I really like getting into. So we market our vegetables through a UPIC CSA. That means that, as Jenny mentioned, on February 1st, you can go sign up for a share, you pay up front, and then you come out every week throughout the entire summer to get your vegetables. Now, we do harvest quite a bit for people, but we also keep some fun stuff for folks to do. So when you come out, you will be picking up some vegetables from our wash and pack shed, and then you'll be going out into the gardens and harvesting your lettuce or your carrots or your greens or whatever you really want that day. This coming summer, we are going to be supporting 80 families. It's our new high. It's an awful lot of families to be supporting off of an area that's under an acre. And we love having our families visit every week. We find that having people out to do the harvesting for themselves and to see the farm as it goes through the season helps to educate and builds ownership and community amongst our shareholder base. We really like our UPIC CSA model. Okay, so I have the pleasure and the blessing of being able to be full-time year-round staff at the Nature Center doing something I really love. But the garden is big enough and intense enough that we would not be doing anything if I did not have wonderful assistants, interns, volunteers, everybody that comes out. This page is pretty crowded, but it barely scrapes the surface in terms of the amount of help that I get out on the farm all through the season. In fact, we just ended up at the beginning of December putting the last compost on the last beds at the end of this season so that they'll be ready in the spring. So there'll be information at the end of the presentation about how to contact Mariah Armstrong, who's in attendance and who is the farm manager. She's also our volunteer coordinator out at the Kalamazoo Nature Center. So there will be a way to get in touch with her if you're interested in volunteering, or if you know of somebody that might want to be an intern, or if you might want to be an intern. That information will be shared at the end. And once again, there are a lot of volunteers in the audience, and I thank you all. We wouldn't be producing vegetables if it wasn't for all the help that I get. Okay, so I think I've convinced everybody that we raise vegetables, but we are also an educational farm. We have people coming through all the time. We educate our shareholders, obviously, but we also have some programming specifically to reach out to people in the community. So this past summer, we started our farm club. It's for the 5 to 10 age range. The kids came out for 3 hours each week, Wednesday mornings, and we just had a blast. They learned everything about farming, totally hands-on. We only had 10 kids per class, and we usually had 3 adults helping the class. So there was a great teacher to student ratio, and the kids learned how to plant, they learned how to transplant, they learned how to make soil blocks, they learned how to harvest. They also got to visit with all sorts of animals. We had a lovely farmer down the street who was willing to share her farm, so we got to see her horses and her donkeys and her goats and her rabbits. We also got to see the rehabilitated animals here at the Nature Center, our raptors and our possums. Our former animal care director is in the center of the picture there, Karen Lambert. She was able to bring out a baby raccoon that she's fostering. The kids just absolutely loved getting to meet that little critter. And anyhow, we just have lots and lots of fun. We do lots every week. It's really high energy and a ton of fun. Another program that we started this past summer was the Young Farmers Camp. Now, the Kalamazoo Nature Center runs a summer camp. It's something that we're really well known for. And this summer we decided to start bringing groups over to the DeLano side to actually participate in the farm as part of their week at camp. So they hang out over on the DeLano side. They help a lot at the farm, but they also get to do all of the fun camp things that all the rest of the campers do. But they add to that by getting to play with chickens, getting to harvest flowers. They planted an asparagus patch that they were pretty astonished when I told them that that asparagus would still be producing when and if they ever had grandkids. So they help out a ton. It was really, really great to have them. And most of these kids were middle school kids, and were actually really, really, really helpful, strong, helpful, determined. They were a ton of fun to have around. Now, the pandemic has interrupted most of our school and after school programming, but I love this kind of programming. Usually we would just get kids that came out for an hour, 2 hours at a time, but it's enough time for them to get a little taste of where their food comes from. We always make sure to harvest flowers to send home. Pulling carrots is a favorite activity because everybody likes carrots, and it's kind of like an Easter egg hunt. You pull something out of the ground that you didn't even know was there. And there on the right, you see a little salamander that one of our students found when moving tarps. So we really hope to get back to some school and after school programming because it's a great way to reach out to the wider community here in Kalamazoo County. So I think I've convinced you that the farm is a pretty hopping place over the summer. That's the context of our farm. Now I'm going to go into a little teeny bit of history, and then the mechanism by which this type of restorative agriculture actually works to sequester carbon. It's really why we're here. So this picture was taken on June 2nd in 2018. I had been working at the Nature Center for just a couple of months, and I was absolutely thrilled because I had finally been able to repair our Troy-built rototiller. And June 3rd, the very next day, I had a big school group come out. So I was so happy to be able to get some ground tilled up so that the kids could come out. I remember we planted parsley that next day. I'm mentioning this because when I started farming here at the Nature Center, I had been a pretty traditional organic market gardener. I tilled every spring before I planted crops. I tilled in the middle of the season if I needed to plant a succession crop. I tilled when I spread compost or rock powders. I tilled if there were buildup of weeds. I really, honestly couldn't imagine how to create a garden without using a rototiller. But I do like to keep abreast of what's going on in the gardening scene. And I had been hearing about this no-till method. I was first attracted to it because it promised that it would increase your soil health and increase the nutrient density of the crops that you raised on that soil. And those are two things that really drive me as a farmer. I want healthy soil and I want to be raising the best quality food that I possibly can. So I decided to give it a try. The very next spring, 2019, we put in our first 50 by 100 foot no-till beds. It felt like an enormous risk. I can remember coming out every day and checking to make sure that things hadn't died from being planted straight into compost. It just didn't really make sense, but it worked, and it worked really well. And since then, I've continued to learn. I've continued to learn, like Donna said, by reading and listening to everything that I can, and by having the experience out in the garden that is showing me that it's really working. The crops are growing. we're getting more and better crops. Anyhow, we'll cover a little bit more of that later, but it felt like a risk, but it has totally, it's totally changed my mind. And I'm a bit of an evangelist now about the topic. So we'll go back to the very foundation of raising food. Soil is the very foundation. And this is the same sort of pie chart that I looked at when I took a soil science class many, many, many years ago. And it just tells you the basics. Soil is comprised of sand, silt, and clay. They're the mineral component. We always have to bring in some air and some water. And then that little 5% slice of the pie, soil organic matter. When I first learned this stuff, I was taught that the soil organic matter is by and large decaying matter that, you know, old plant residue, that sort of thing, or maybe if you put compost on your soil, that was your soil organic matter. And it's true, but it's only part of the story. I'm sure that some of us remember, 5-10 years ago, when you couldn't turn around without reading an article about how many bacteria were in the human body. I can remember articles that said for every one human cell, we had 10 bacterial cells. Our guts were full of bacteria. Our skin was covered with bacteria. And this bacteria was actually necessary for us functioning as humans. Well, the soil is the same way. It isn't just the chemical components, the minerals, the air, the water. It is chock full of bacteria. A teaspoon of healthy soil can have up to 1 billion bacteria in it. And beyond bacteria, we have archaeobacters, protozoa, micro and macro invertebrates like springtails and earthworms, and also mycorrhizal fungi. There is a lot of decaying organic matter in most soils, and part of that decaying matter supports this soil ecosystem to some degree. But another key source of nutrients for the soil food web comes from the plants that have their roots in the soil. And this is one of the key things that makes regenerative agriculture possible, is that there's a symbiotic relationship between plants and the soil food web, in which plants actually feed the soil microinvertebrates and the little guys in the soil, basically. Plants feed the soil. So we got to kind of go back to some of the basics, like where do plants actually come from? Where does their mass originate? Most people at first guess think that somehow they're taking something out of the soil. Their roots are in the soil and they're pulling up all sorts of stuff from the soil and building this beautiful big structure. But 95% of the mass of any plant, be it a tree or a blade of grass or a tomato, 95% of that mass actually comes from our atmosphere. Plants are actually built out of atmospheric gases. So let's cover a little bit of the science behind that. You guys probably all remember from high school biology class a little bit about photosynthesis, but we're going to do a quick crash course. Photosynthesis happens when plants pull water and nutrients out of the soil through their roots, and they suck in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through the stomata in their leaves. And then in the chlorophyll, when the sun hits the chlorophyll, those molecules are broken apart and rearranged, and the carbon and the oxygen and the hydrogen all become carbon sugar chains, glucose chains. Now, these carbon sugar chains are what the plant uses to build every bit of its mass, be it a twig, a leaf, a seed. Photosynthesized carbon sugars are what makes the plant's mass. And what is truly incredible to me is that 30 to 40% of those photosynthesized carbon sugars actually get pumped into the soil, out of the plant's roots and into the soil, where they feed the soil food web. Now, why does a plant do this? Why does a plant share all of those carbon sugars that they've gone to the trouble of photosynthesizing? It's not just because they're altruistic. It's because there's a symbiotic relationship between bacteria and microinvertebrates and mycorrhizal fungi and all the rest of the soil food web and the plants that grow in that soil. picture you're seeing here is a teeny tiny little pine seedling. Its roots aren't anywhere near as big as what it looks like right there. Its roots are actually just right around the very base of the stem structure. That huge tree-like branch of roots is actually all mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi can expand the reach of a plant's roots by up to 1,000%, and that helps hugely in terms of scavenging nutrients from the soil. Mycorrhizal fungi actually penetrate the roots of a plant. They're not separate. They actually work their way, they pierce the root structures, and they bring nutrients right into the plant's roots. And in turn, the plant pumps out carbon sugars to nourish the mycorrhizal fungi. It's a lovely symbiotic exchange. Bacteria do much the same thing. Bacteria come from the soil and they kind of belly up to the bar of the roots of the plants, because the plant's actually exuding all of these delicious carbon sugars. The bacteria chow down, and of course, when you eat, you've got to produce waste, and that waste happens to be the perfect sort of food for a plant, and it happens to be deposited right next to the roots, right where the plants can get to it. So plants and soil microbes actually evolved this beautiful symbiotic relationship where they both nourish one another. And part of that nourishment is that carbon is pulled out of our atmosphere by the plants through photosynthesis and pumped into our soil, where it becomes part of the soil ecosystem. Some of it is evaporated out because things in the soil live and die, but a lot of it is stabilized in different sorts of carbon compounds within the soil. And the more healthy carbon is pumped into the soil, the more carbon that soil will eventually sequester. So more carbon actually means healthier soils too. We're very, very aware that we can't pump carbon into our atmosphere. We can't pump carbon into our oceans. It causes carbonic acid, which can dissolve coral reefs and damage other things. But soils, they actually need carbon. Carbon in the soil is usually called soil organic matter, like on that little pie chart of how soil is made. But a 1% increase in soil organic matter means that that soil can actually absorb an extra 20,000 gallons of water an acre. That's an amazing help in terms of heavy rainfalls or droughts. Soil is more resilient to both of those extremes. Soil organic matter also captures nutrients and makes the soil more fertile for the plants that grow in that soil. And increases the soil organic matter actually mean that the microbes and the soil food web actually becomes more diverse and more balanced and more resilient to any sort of shocks or stressors that might happen. So more carbon means that we are building healthier soils. So this really shocked me. Since the dawn of agriculture, but mainly since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we have lost 133 billion tons of carbon from our soils worldwide. That's an enormous amount of carbon. I think that if we were able to remove all of the excess carbon from our atmosphere, it would be right around in the range of 130, I think it's like 136 billion tons. But anyhow, we've lost an astronomical amount of carbon from our soils. But we have a biological self-replicating method for moving carbon out of our atmosphere and pumping it into our carbon depleted soils. And that biological self-replicating method is actually every plant you see can actually pump carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back into the soil. So that carbon to the soil pump that plants actually do, that evolution between plants and the soil ecosystem, that is the very principle of regenerative agriculture. That's why regenerative agriculture works. We just have to set the table so that the plant and the microbe symbiosis has an easier time working. So the principles of regenerative agriculture all aim to make that symbiotic relationship more productive. So we're going to go through those. The first slides are going to be principles and the things the no-nos, the things you don't want to do. And then I'll show you a little bit of what we've been doing out at DeLano Farm. So the very first principle, the foundational principle of regenerative agriculture, is to disturb the soil as little as possible. On your left, you see somebody plowing and throwing up an absolute cloud of soil. All that soil is going away. It's blowing away. It'll eventually work its way into our waterways, and then it's gone. And it actually takes a long time to make soil, and we are losing tillable soil worldwide every year. Every year, I believe we lose an area roughly the size of England, where soil becomes desertified because it's been over-farmed and treated poorly. So there on the left, you don't want to be plowing like that. Every time you plow, not only are you causing erosion, but you're basically putting a hurricane through the soil food web. You're churning up all the houses of all those little microbes and bacteria and mycorrhizal fungi. And when they're exposed to sunlight and the atmosphere, they die and then they evaporate. They actually oxidize and become carbon dioxide that goes right back up into our atmosphere. In fact, if you look at a time lapse of carbon dioxide concentration in the Northern Hemisphere, it always peaks right around March and April, because that's when farmers are plowing and they're killing lots of soil life, and that soil life just vaporizes and becomes carbon dioxide. So regenerative farmers do their best not to ever till. On the right, you see a farmer actually spraying. Who knows whether they're spraying a fertilizer or a pesticide or an herbicide, but all of those biocides and even the fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers, they kill the soil microbes as well. So we do our best to disturb the soil as little as possible by not tilling and by not spraying synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. Now, out at the Nature Center, we put in permanent no-till beds. We started off, it's kind of strange to say it, but we did start off by tilling. So there on the left, you see that we started off by tilling. I put on a lot of rock phosphate and green sand and I think zinc sulfate and copper sulfate, all the macro and micronutrients the soil was low in. I put on in the form of rock powders, and then I tilled in. And then we began the very long process of covering each and every bed with a nice thick layer of compost. That picture in the middle shows Taniqua. She's our camp director and an absolute joy to work with. And she came out and volunteered some of her time to help spread compost with me. And that's how we build our beds. And then on the right, that it's exactly the same area, just 1 year later. And you can see we've got really healthy spinach and cabbage growing there. We haven't tilled anything. We never intend to till any of it. We do have to make sure it's kept weed free. We put a little bit of extra compost on, you know, sometimes once a year, sometimes every other year. But that's what it looks like. It's growing, it's healthy, it's doing really, really well, and we haven't had to till it at all. Second principle of regenerative agriculture is to keep living roots in the soil. You see the picture there shows a farm that was probably plowed in the fall. A lot of farmers used to like to plow in the fall, but then when the snow melts and the spring rains come, there are no roots to hold anything in place and the soil just washes away. It's another picture of erosion. Living roots in the soil will not only prevent erosion, but going back to what we were talking about before, they act as a pump, taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and putting it into the soil. So keeping living roots in the soil is the #2 principle of regenerative agriculture. Out at the DeLano Farm, one of the ways that we do that is to make sure to cover crop. It is my goal to never have soil bare if I can help it. Now, sometimes I have bare soil, sometimes I can't help it, but by and large, we aim to keep the ground covered either by cover crops or by productive crops, paying crops. All through the summer, we basically take one crop out and put another crop in. And then at the end of the summer, we plant a variety of different cover crops. Or if we have a gap in the season of 4 weeks or so, we can put in like a buckwheat, a quick cover crop in the summer. On the left, you see oats, peas, and radishes. I usually plant those in August, and then they mature and they're winter killed. So that picture was probably taken right before Christmas. Things are dying, and the deer found this patch and had just gone to town. Deer love cover crops. So that will actually be killed by the cold winter temperatures that we're having right now. And then in the spring, I'll just be able to rake it aside, rake it into the pathways, and plant directly into the beds. The center picture shows a rye and clover cover crop that I have rolled down. It used to be about 5 feet tall. I pushed it over with I didn't actually mow it, but I pushed it over with a mowing device. And immediately after that picture was taken, the interns and I pulled a big piece of clear plastic over it, which trapped all the sun's heat and killed all of the rye and clover. And there on the right, you can see the residue of the rye clover cover crop with some baby cabbages planted in it. So the rye and the clover sequester carbon in the soil the whole time they're growing. They prevent erosion all winter long. And then after I knock them down and actually solarize them to kill them, they serve as a lovely mulch for the crops that come next. So keeping living roots in the soil is one of the best ways for making sure that we're nourishing our soil, preventing erosion, and building soil carbon stocks. Third principle of regenerative agriculture is to always keep your soil covered. The slide calls it soil armor. I don't need the military terminology. We just like to keep it blanketed, cozy, warm. When we don't, all the organic matter in soil will burn out. Just like I've described, we can actually use soil so much that it loses its soil food web. And then it really doesn't do a good job of growing much of anything. So when you can't grow something, you got to keep the soil covered. Out at DeLano, we do this in 3 main ways. On the left, you see an organic mulch, leaf mulch. I either use leaves or I use waste hay or straw, whatever I can happen to get my hands on. This is my favorite thing to use as a mulch because it is organic matter and it feeds all of the earthworms and all the other guys in the soil. They love it. When you pull that stuff aside in the spring, the soil just looks like chocolate cake. It's beautiful. In the middle, there's plastic mulch. Not my favorite mulch to use, but it has a huge advantage in that black plastic doesn't allow sunlight to penetrate. So when I put on a plastic mulch, it actually serves the purpose of killing weeds without having to rototill. And the heat of the sun hitting that black plastic usually only goes about 1/4 to 1/2 inch deep. So it really doesn't have the effect of killing too many of the soil microbes. That being said, it's not my favorite thing to do, but it certainly does have a role on our farm. The last side there on the right, the deep compost mulch is the way we build our beds, yes, but we're putting compost on the soil, which actually keeps it covered and nourishes it. So deep compost mulch is another way of keeping our soil covered. The 4th principle out of 5 is to make sure you maintain biodiversity. The slide showing what not to do here is a big field of Roundup Ready soybeans as far as the eye can see. It's called a monoculture. And I'm sure that most of us know that a monoculture is nothing but a buffet for every pest or fungal species that might attack that crop. And when those crops are attacked like that, then the farmer ends up spraying more pesticides, more herbicides, more fungicides. Instead of putting out a big buffet like that, we try to make sure that we diversify. On the far left, you see a trellis of cucumbers, and can't really tell it because it's all green. But if we were able to get a little bit closer, you would see that I don't just have cucumbers growing up the trellis. I have Tulsi basil. I have sweet alyssum. Both of those attract all sorts of wonderful beneficial insects. I also have nasturtium, which are supposed to help deter cucumber beetles. Now, didn't work perfectly, but I got 2 more weeks out of those cucumbers than I would without increasing the diversity surrounding those plants. The center picture here, 2 of my favorite kiddos, it's Sophie and her brother Lincoln, and they're trapping a chicken that they happened to let out. they're being very helpful. They're being very helpful, but it's a good slide for showing you how much diversity we actually have. On one side of Lincoln, there are celery roots. There's some sprouting broccoli. On the other side, there's ferny bulb fennel. Right past that, there is some lettuce that's actually being shielded by the fennel. It's keeping the heat of the summer sun off those lettuces. After that, there's some okra that's also growing tall and shielding those lettuces. And then after that, there's a few more lettuces that are planted in the stubble of a buckwheat cover crop that I had grown. So when there's this much diversity, it's harder for pest insects or fungal diseases or anything of that nature to actually just run rampant in your garden. We still have pests, we still have funguses, we still have problems, but we've achieved enough diversity that the ecosystem is balanced and nothing ever really gets out of hand. And then on the far right there, you can see a little baby praying mantis and a ladybug. We have really incredible reserves of beneficial insects all around the farm. We don't ever spray any sort of wide spectrum pesticides. So there's just tons of habitat and tons of aphids and stuff for them to eat. And it all works out as a lovely balance in the end. So last but not least, in terms of our principles, is integrating animals into your system. Now, I can't do that right now. Who knows? We're moving in that direction. But right now, part of my MEEP certification is that we don't allow animals into the growing area. Some large-scale regenerative producers, they have these incredible rotations where they'll grow a cover crop and then they'll graze beef cattle through there, et cetera, et cetera. But for us, for our situation right now, we have some lovely laying hens that marched all around one side of the garden this year. They ate most of our compost, they ate tons of bad bugs, and they gave us lovely eggs in the bargain. Center picture there is our farm cat, Leo. He actually doesn't belong to us. He just comes and visits because he loves people and he loves hunting mice. He keeps our mice and our voles and everything like that, those populations under control. And then on the right is a beautiful little killdeer who decided to nest right in the middle of our lettuce this spring. So we feel like we're doing a pretty good job of creating a welcome environment if a killdeer wants to nest in our garden. Like I mentioned earlier, this doesn't cover true animal integration. So if anybody wants more information on that or wants to ask questions about that, I can field questions, but right now we're not really doing that out at DeLano. So that covers what we've done out at the farm. The hard thing is, how do you get this type of agriculture to be practiced on all of the acreage, on acreage worldwide? And we're moving in that direction, albeit, nothing happens as quickly as you might want it to. I will mention here this slide, there are large scale producers like General Mills and Dannon that are offering financial incentives to their contract farmers to switch to regenerative techniques. Agencies are starting to develop regenerative certification standards so that you can actually maybe go to the store at some point and find out that your food was raised using regenerative agriculture. Whole Foods surveys the alternative food scene, and last year they decided that regenerative agriculture was the #1 food trend. And this year, Forbes magazine reported that business interest in regenerative agriculture had increased by 138%. I think it is in my nature to view some of these trends perhaps as greenwashing, but the other side of my nature basically says that anything that we can do to move farmers and consumers in the direction of regenerative practices is useful. I also know that in terms of some of the large scale, the General Mills financial incentive scheme, that Gabe Brown, one of the foremost authorities on regenerative agriculture here in the US, was actually giving them advice. So that makes me hopeful, and hopefully if we keep all the irons in the fire, we will come up with enough things that work that we can start to get widespread buy-in to regenerative ag. So other ways of encouraging the transition to regenerative agriculture. There's a think tank, Data for Progress, that has developed an amazing set of farm policies that are designed to incentivize regenerative agriculture and also to eliminate some of the subsidies that went to poor farming practices. Unfortunately, it's part of the New Green Deal policy series. Obviously, it hasn't been enacted yet, but we've got people thinking about how to make that work. The Natural Resources Conservation Services, they are incentivizing cover cropping and crop diversification and crop rotation, which is wonderful. And although right now most farmers don't receive any sort of extra financial benefit for growing with regenerative techniques, that could change if there's enough consumer demand. I personally have read enough stories of farmers trying out cover cropping and seeing improvements in their soil texture, et cetera, and then gradually going whole hog into regenerative ag, that it makes me really, really hopeful that if we can get some farmers to start, that they in turn will help other farmers see the benefits to this type of agriculture. So some of my observations and hopes to end with. I don't actually have any hard numbers, but I do a lot of observation, and I've definitely noticed an increase in red wiggler worms and earthworms out of the farm. We do keep track of how much our farm produces, and we have definitely increased per bed productivity. And we're seeing a lot less disease, pest, and weed pressure than we used to. So I am encouraged, and it makes me want to keep moving in this direction because I can see positive things happening. I feel it's necessary for me to just note right now that regenerative techniques are not something new that were invented, in 1995 or something like that. They've been used in different cultures all over the world for, the entire history of agriculture. We're just realizing their benefits now and attempting to scale them up to worldwide, technique, basically. Other things that really need to be said when we're talking about agriculture is that we all need to compost. Composting is a great way to take carbon out of the waste stream, to stabilize it, and to return it to the soil. And if anybody knows anybody that's interested, we here in Kalamazoo and every town in the US needs to start some sort of municipal composting center. I would love to see something like that happen. All of our food waste, all of our leaves, all of our organic waste going into beautiful compost that could then be distributed to any gardener that wanted it in town. It's like a dream come true. A hope of mine beyond just municipal composting is that I would love to be able to find somebody who wants to come out to DeLano and start tracking the carbon content of our soils and the nutrient density of the plants that we raise. That to me, that would, like I said, that'd be a little bit of a dream come true. I'd love to get some data on what we're actually doing beyond just my anecdotal observations. And last but not least, we'll put this in the chat too, but anyone that would be interested in volunteering, we've got an incredible group of volunteers, or interning. Generally, we have high school and college students that come out during their summer break and do an internship with us. They can anybody that's interested can reach out to Mariah through our volunteer email there. Like I said, I'll put it in the chat, but it's volunteer@naturecenter.org. That'll get you right to Mariah. And if you let her know that you'd like to volunteer, or somebody that would like to intern on the farm, we can get that information and reach out to you and get the ball rolling. So that's all I really have to say right now. And I can take any questions.
Yay. If you want to, we love looking at your pictures so much. If you want to stop sharing, though, I bet everyone will give you a reaction.
Let's see, there we go. Okay, back to stop sharing. Okay.
I second Susan in the chat. That was a phenomenal talk. That's why we love Kirsten and the Nature Center and everything that is happening out there. Thank you so much. That is amazing. There are
Thank you all for having me. Like I said, I'm a little bit of an evangelist about this. So any chance I get to tell people about it, I'm happy.
We need that. There's some questions in the chat about whether how trees can be part of that system, where you get your cover crops and how you make those decisions, alternatives to glyphosates, to what you do to get rid of invasives. Those are the first top three.
Oh my gosh, look at all this.
I know, there's quite a few in there now.
I'm going to start right at the top. So Rick has a question. Do trees provide any benefit to farms? Yes, 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 yes. Lots of benefits. Okay, number one thing that comes